Okay, so this is the Bible study for First Samuel chapter 31 and Second Samuel chapter 1. I think we covered this in the introduction um, to First Samuel, but these books were likely written as the same book and divided up sort of as the Bible as we know it was becoming established. Um, for the purpose of clarity and I suppose emphasis, but it's actually probably true that this was one long sort of maybe even multi-volume set of First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, and Second Kings, and they probably all existed really as one book originally, and it was sort of a history book or an annals, and then it was split up for easier study with separate titles and things like that. So you that being said, I really felt like as we were studying this that if we're going to go on into Second Samuel, which I think we should because there's a continuity that's there, then we kind of need to take these two chapters together, um, because I think um, the response to what happens in First Samuel 31 by David happens in Second Samuel 1. And I kind of feel like although First Samuel chapter 31 ties up Saul's reign with a bow, I'm giving you a little bit of a spoiler there. And that's probably why people divided it right there. Yet I think probably the spiritual truth that we can apply and we can take from this is better found in Second Samuel 1. So I want to take these two together, since we're going to go on into Second Samuel anyway. It seems silly to separate them and take one, and then maybe the more prominent spiritual truth that I feel like God wants to apply to our lives happens in the second Samuel, the book of Second Samuel in the first chapter. So the text for today says, "Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor bearers, 'Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me.' But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroth and fastened his body on the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked. He answered, I have escaped from the Israelite camp. What happened? David asked. Tell me. The men fled from battle, he replied. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, how do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, the young man said, and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me and I said, what can I do? He asked me, who are you? An Amalekite, I answered. Then he said to me, stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive. So I stood beside him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and have brought them here to my Lord. Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and for his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, where are you from? I'm a foreigner. I'm a son of a foreigner, an Amalekite, he answered. David answered him, why weren't you afraid to lift your hand and destroy the Lord's anointed? Then David called one of his men and said, go, strike him down. So he struck him down and he died. For David had said to him, your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, I killed the Lord's anointed. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. Okay. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And this is 1 Samuel chapter 31 and 2 Samuel chapter 1. Number 1 says, what happened in our last two Bible studies in 1 Samuel 29 and 30. Remember that that David was sent home, and when he got, but because the commanders of the Philistines didn't want him there, and that when he got home and his men got home, they found Ziklag burned and all their wives and children gone, all their stuff gone. And so then in the last Bible study, they pursued them, chased them down after David inquired of God, obviously, and they were able to overtake them. God provided an Egyptian slave who told them where the Amalekites were, and they recovered everything. And then, of course, on the way back, some of the men had stayed because they were too tired to continue. On the way back, some of the evil men in David's army did not want to give the people who stayed behind a share in the plunder, and David said, don't be evil like that. we're all going to share this. And then he sent uh, stuff to everybody else who had been raided and things had been taken from, to people of Judah, um, and people in the areas where David had and his men had stayed and sort of been protected, it seems like. And so that's what happened in the last two weeks, two Bible studies. Number two says what happened before that in 1 Samuel 28. A, Saul was afraid of the Philistines and could not hear from God. That's true. B, Saul consulted a medium or witch to bring up Samuel and try to get the word of the Lord. That's true. And then C, Samuel told Saul that he and his sons would die tomorrow. So that's important, obviously, given what we just read, that actually comes true, that even from death, Samuel's prophecy was the word of God. Number three, what happened in today's text in 31, 1 through 3? The Philistines fought. The Philistines were hot pursuit of Saul and his sons and killed his sons. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and the archers overtook him and wounded him critically. And all of that's in here. The Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead. B, the Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his son Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. That's true. C, the fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. All that's in there. Number four, what did Saul do according to 31:4? Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." So he asked for his armor bearer to kill him, so that he wasn't abused by the army that would eventually kill him anyway. And that's A. And then the second part, but his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. I'll just say that there's some discrepancy between this verse and what we read in the next chapter, in the first chapter of Second Samuel. We can talk about that a little bit when we get there, um, why that might be and what reason perhaps this Amalekite might have to not tell the truth, or tell it exactly the way it was, or how it's possible that these two things, one was more of a summary and the second one told the story more in more detail, but we'll see. Um, nobody else was there to tell the tale, with the armor bearer falling on his own sword rather than killing the king. So number five says what happened in 31:7. A, the Israelites in the nearby towns saw their army fleeing and what happened to Saul and his sons, so they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines just won the war, and the only thing protecting these towns was the Israelite army, and they're fleeing and they're gone. And so the Philistines are going to come and raid and take the place anyway. So they left. The people in the neighboring towns that are now unprotected just took off and abandoned their town. And then B, the Philistines moved into the empty Israelite towns. So the Philistines occupied them anyway. But I think from the Israelite perspective, they're going to occupy them one way or another. I'd rather them occupy them with me alive somewhere else than with me dead or abused, because I stood to try to keep my town here. Number six, what happened in 31:8 through 10? It says the next, well, it's A, the Philistines came to strip the dead and found Saul and his three sons. That's true. B, they cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor. They're sort of emasculating him. They're taking, well, first of all, if you want to prove that you killed Saul, it's easier to take his head than his whole body. And his armor probably has his crest on it or something like that identifies it as his. And nobody, no military man would be caught without their armor unless they're dead. And then it might have some value as well. C, they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news, probably with these, trophies. D, they put Saul's armor in the temple of the Asheroth and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. So these are the kinds of things that Saul was worried about, probably worried about them doing things like this even as he was alive and abusing him. But he was basically a trophy, so they hung him on the wall, and, as well as Jonathan, I think, and put, his armor, which was more valuable, in their temple to their gods. Number 7, what did the men of Jabesh Gilead do when they heard this? So it says, all their valiant men marched through the night and they took down the bodies of Saul and his sons. So they weren't going to let these bodies hang there on the wall and rot, um, and be disgraced. So they went and took these bodies down and disposed of them properly, burned them, and buried the bones. And gave them something that was important to the Israelites and to many people across history, and that is to be put to rest, and their bones not be scattered or used as trophies. If you go back, when the Israelites left Egypt in the Exodus, they took Joseph's bones, and buried them, and so that was something that was important, to be buried with your own family, not to be left someplace. Number 8, what happened in Second Samuel 1 through 4. So David hears of this on the he gets back from fighting the Amalekites, and here he is in his town for 2 days that needs to be completely rebuilt because it's been burned. uh, and and on the third day, this guy shows up, um, and he says, "Where have you came from?" He said, I escaped from the Israelite camp. This is what I saw when I was there, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." So David gets the report here of Saul and Jonathan's death, which, remember, he may have mixed feelings. Jonathan was his close friend, um, but Saul was the one that was trying to kill him. But Saul was the anointed, and David wouldn't kill him. So David's response here, I think, is important to us. Number 9, how, according to the man's story, did he know that Saul was dead? A, he was on Mount Gilboa. That's true. B, he saw Saul leaning on his spear. That's true. Well, at least that's what he said, according to his story. C, Saul had asked him to kill him. And then D, the Amalekite admitted to killing Saul. So now, this is a little bit different story. According to the chapter 31, Saul fell on his own sword and died. According to 2 Samuel 1, according to the Amalekite, um, Saul was leaning on his spear and wasn't dead. And he asked this Amalekite to kill him. Now, there's a lot of thoughts here. One is my first thought is that, you know from the perspective of the information we learn, chapter 31 says it matter of factly, as if it was fact. This is what happened, whereas chapter 1 of Second Samuel tells it as a story told by a person. And I think we can all pretty easily see that that person may have had motives to take credit. So here is David just returning, and he's fought the Amalekites. The Amalekites are not friends, and this Amalekite shows up in his camp, in his place, needing help, basically. And how am I going to get help? Well, if I can tell David that I killed the king, his nemesis, then maybe David will not hurt me. But he's misjudged David if that's what he was trying. So it's possible that he knew what happened in general, but was trying to claim something that he hadn't done. If that's what he was doing, he made literally a grave mistake. David may have killed this Amalekite anyway. I don't know. But what we see here is that the Amalekite claimed to do something that ensured his death, given David's feeling about Saul, the Lord's anointed. I feel like it was very important that David was not in that battle. That David probably wouldn't have fought the Israelites anyway, but if he had, he needed to not be the one. He wouldn't have killed Saul, and God was had pronounced judgment, and Samuel had already said this is what's going to happen, and so Saul was going to die in that battle, but it wasn't going to be by the hand of David. And honestly, David was going to punish anybody from whose hand this did come. So um, my feeling is that chapter 31 tells us the truth of what happened. Chapter 1 tells us a story of somebody trying to take credit for something that he thought would give him a favored place in David's heart and mind, or um, some grace, but that was just not the case. That was a misjudgment. um, it is possible that the Amalekite story was true, and the chapter 31 was more of a summary that was sort of trying to spare us some of the details or that information, or trying to protect Saul um, from from that revelation. I don't know, but I'm more inclined to believe, and it really doesn't matter theologically which was true, or it doesn't change what we believe about all that's happening here. But I think it's probably more interesting that to see that how David responds to the person that killed. I mean, spoiler alert, David's gonna become king, and this paved the way for it. Um, but he wasn't rejoicing, he was mourning. He was not, and he was punishing the person by whose hand this happened. So I think that's the significant thing that we need to hear here. Number 10, how did David and his men respond according to the news? According to 1:11 and 12, which says, Then David and all his men with him off their clothes, took hold of their clothes and torn them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And then 17 through 27 is this lament that David wrote for Saul and Jonathan and taught to all of Judah. And so A and B are both true. We could say, and he taught this lament. Number 11 says, how would you have responded? And I think for most of us, a sigh of relief. The person that's trying to kill me is dead. Maybe we could say it makes sense that he was hurting for Jonathan, but why is he hurting for Saul? Why is he mourning for Saul? Saul was God's anointed. This may all have been God's will, but that doesn't mean he has to be happy about it. He's not happy about it because he doesn't believe it was God's original will. He believes that God anointed Saul, and that Saul was God's chosen instrument. And so even though God has already pronounced judgment, that doesn't make David happy about it. And I want to just consider that when God is a just God, and there are people who have opposed us and oppressed us, um, and God will bring about justice. I believe that. How we respond when God brings about justice tells a lot about us. Um, so there have been people, and I've watched it. There have been people that have hurt the people of God, and the truly godly among the people of God, when those people receive justice, are not happy about it. Their heart breaks for the person, um, just as God's heart breaks for the person. So if somebody turns against God and does evil and then receives that justice, I don't believe that God celebrates and laughs over the justice. I believe God's heart hurts. Um, it's sort of akin to when I was a child and I was being whooped. My mom saying, "This hurts me more than it does you." Now, I never believed it, but she felt like it was something that I needed. That didn't make her happy about giving it to me. Punishment, justice, correction, is something that we sometimes deserve, we sometimes need. That doesn't mean that God is happy about bringing it about. And if our hearts know the heart of God, if we know the heart of God, then I don't believe we'll be happy even when justice is served, when it means that somebody perishes. Or I don't think we'll rejoice. God doesn't rejoice when somebody is condemned to hell. We shouldn't rejoice. God doesn't rejoice when somebody receives the negative um, consequence of their actions. I don't believe we should rejoice. So here's David in a position where most humans would rejoice, but he's not rejoicing. He's mourning. He's mourning because this is how it turned out. He's mourning even as we know that this is justice and this was the will of God because of what Saul had done. Yet that doesn't make us happy about it. And we need to try to find that place where we hear the heart of God and we're not rejoicing when somebody receives their due, because it's really heartbreaking when that happens. Number 12 says, "What did David ask the man in 114? Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand and destroy the Lord's anointed?" There's something wrong with you. There is something evil in you if you are not afraid to raise your hand against the Lord's anointed. And then the second part says, what did David do? He commanded his men to kill him. And this was the punishment for admitting to having killed the Lord's anointed, even if it wasn't true. You said you did it, and this is what you get. If you were trying to take credit for something, just know I'm not giving credit for this. This is not a something that I'm happy about. And so I think this is probably the most important thing that we can learn from these two chapters. I mean, we can talk about God fulfilling his promise to David. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the coming chapters when that really happens. But we can talk about God being true to his word. All of that is true, but it's even more interesting to me how David responds to this death, and he does not rejoice. His heart is breaking. He mourns for the one that God had anointed and chosen to use before him.